You probably think you know what counts as income and what doesn't. And that confidence is exactly where people get into trouble with the IRS. Loans, gifts, reimbursements, money moving between your own businesses, none of those are supposed to be income. But the IRS can legally treat them as income if they aren't structured and documented correctly. And when that happens, it's not just tax, it's interest and penalties, and often paying very expensive professional fees to fight the position. So in this video, I'm going to show you how the tax code actually defines income, how this comes up in real audits, and how to protect yourself and make sure it doesn't happen to you. And I'm Jasmine DiLucci. I'm a practicing tax attorney, CPA, and enrolled agent. I got my first tax license as an enrolled agent in high school, and by the end of this video, you'll understand the legal foundation of what counts as income, so you know exactly how to protect yourself for an IRS audit. In this video, I'll break down what legally counts as income, how the IRS reclassifies loans, reimbursements, and gifts as income, and how to protect yourself in an IRS audit. If you want to stop overpaying the IRS, this is the section you can't skip. What counts as income is the very starting point for every audit and every tax bill. So let's start with the foundation. When we talk about income for federal tax purposes, we're starting with IRC 61A, and here's what it says. Gross income means all income from whatever source derived. That's it. That's the statute. And I know what you're thinking. Jasmine, that's incredibly broad. You're right. It is. And that is the point. Congress intentionally wrote it to, by default, include everything unless there's an exclusion under the code. But of course, that raises the question, if gross income is all income, then what's the legal definition of income? And that's where the Supreme Court stepped in with Commissioner versus Glenshaw Glass in 1955. Here's what happened. Glenshaw Glass Company received punitive damages in an antitrust lawsuit. The IRS said, that is income, you owe tax on it. The taxpayer said, no way, this isn't income, it's a legal settlement, it's compensation for harm, not a gain. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court established a three-part test that's still used today to determine whether something is income. Here's the test. Income exists when there is an undeniable accession to wealth, meaning the taxpayer experiences an increase in economic value, clearly realized, meaning the gain is fixed by a transaction or event, and then third, over which the taxpayer has complete dominion, meaning the taxpayer has unrestricted control over the benefit and can use, spend, or dispose of it. Let me break that down in plain English. Accession to wealth means you got something valuable. It doesn't have to be cash. It can be property, services, debt forgiveness, anything that increases your wealth, right? Clearly realized means it actually happened. You can't be taxed on theoretical gains. If your stock goes up in value, but you don't sell it, that's unrealized, so no income yet. But the moment you sell, you realize the gain, and now it's income. Complete dominion means you have control, right? If you receive $50,000, but it's held in escrow and you can't touch it, you may not have dominion yet, but once it's in your account and you can spend it, that's income. Now, here's why this matters so much. This test is incredibly broad. So let's go through some examples to show how this applies in real life. Example 1, debt forgiveness. Okay, let's say you owe the business $100,000 on a loan. One day, the business forgives the debt. You don't have to pay it back. Is that income? Let's apply the test. So accession to wealth, yes, you just got rid of a $100,000 obligation. That's a gain. Is it clearly realized? Yes, the debt was forgiven. It happened. And third was the complete dominion. Yes, you're no longer on the hook for it. So the result, that's $100,000 of taxable income. Even though you didn't receive cash, you received economic benefit by eliminating the debt. Okay, the IRS will tax it as cancellation of debt income. Example 2, gifts. Now let's say that your mom gives you $50,000 as a gift. Is that income? Let's apply the test, right? Accession to wealth? Yes, you received $50,000. Is it clearly realized? Yes, the money hit your account. Is there complete dominion? Yes, you can spend it. So under Glenshaw Glass, this looks like income. But here's the catch. There's a specific statute, IRC section 102, that excludes gifts from gross income. So even if it meets the Glenshaw Glass test, Congress carved out an exception, and that is the only reason it's not taxable income, even though it does meet the definition of income. Example 3, loans. Let's say you take out a $200,000 loan from a bank. Is that income? Accession to wealth? No, you received $200,000, but you also have a $200,000 obligation to pay back. Your net wealth didn't increase. Is it clearly realized? The cash is in your account, but there's no realized gain because the transaction does not produce an accession to wealth. And is there complete dominion? Although you can physically spend the money, your control is legally constrained by the obligation to repay it. The result, loans are not income because they don't represent an undeniable accession to wealth. You have to pay them back. So there's no net gain, but, and this is critical, if the loan is later forgiven, then you have income. So here's the bottom line. Tax law defines income incredibly broadly. Okay, if you receive something of value, you realize it, and you have control over it, the IRS presumes it's income, and the only way out of it is if there's a specific statute that excludes it, like the gift exclusion. And if you don't know these rules, you'll end up paying tax on things that you thought were safe. So understanding the definition is one thing. Understanding how the IRS reclassifies transactions in an audit is what determines whether you owe tax. And here's the key point. All deposits into your bank account are presumed to be income unless you prove otherwise. Let me say that again. Every single deposit is presumed to be income. This is called prima facie evidence of income. It's the legal term that means the IRS doesn't have to prove it's income. You have to prove it's not income. And if you can't, they're going to tax it. Let me give you real world examples of how this plays out. Let's say your sister transfers $50,000 into your business account. She intended it as a gift to help you get started. You use the money to buy equipment and hire employees. You don't report it as income because you know gifts aren't taxable. 3 years later, the IRS audits you. They pull your bank statements. They see a $50,000 deposit. And here's what they say. We see $50,000 deposited into your account on March 15th, 2022. You didn't report this as income. We're adding it back as unreported income. You owe tax, penalties, and interest. And you say, wait, that was a gift from my sister. Gifts aren't taxable. And the IRS says, prove it. And that's where most people fall apart because proving it's a gift usually requires contemporaneous documentation. You need evidence created at the time of the transaction that shows it was a gift. Now, let's change just one fact. Instead of a gift, the $50,000 transfer from your sister was intended to be a loan. In that case, the money is not taxable income only if there was a bona fide obligation to repay at the time the funds were transferred. Family loans very often fail audits, not because they're illegal, but because they're undocumented. If you can't show that the repayment was expected and enforced from day one, you have a problem. So everything up until this point explains the risk, but if you only remember one part of this video, make it this one, because this is how you protect yourself. The IRS starts every audit with the same assumption. Every deposit is income. Your job is not to explain your intent years later, it's to prove what the money was at the moment it was moved, and that proof has to exist before the audit begins. Here's how to do that, okay, step by step. Step 1, decide what the money is before it moves, right? Before any funds are transferred, you must decide whether the money is a gift or a loan. You don't want to leave this ambiguous. The IRS does not allow you to retroactively choose the characterization that points to the lowest tax. Once the money hits your account, the characterization is locked and the documentation should already be in place. Step 2, if the money is a gift, document donative intent. Okay, if the transfer is a gift, your protection starts with the formal IRS documentation. Okay, the correct step is filing a gift tax return, Form 709. Even if no tax is showed, the return creates an official IRS record that the transfer was a gift, not income, and not a loan. This is the strongest evidence of donative intent and should be done for any large gift. Next, pair that with a contemporaneous written intent, a short email, right? Sent at or before the transfer, confirming that the money is a gift with no expectation of repayment, provides time-stamped proof that matches how real gifts actually happen. Finally, back it up with a simple signed gift letter stating the amount, date, and lack of repayment obligation. This doesn't replace the return or the email, but it supports them, and together with these 3 pieces, it eliminates ambiguity. Step 3, if the money's a loan, create real debt, right? If the transfer is a loan, it must look like a loan from day one. That means a written promissory note, a stated interest rate, and a defined repayment schedule. There must also be an expectation of enforcement, right? And actual payments to be made. Emails or messages at the time of the transfer confirming that the money is a loan help establish intent, but intent alone is not enough. The terms must exist and the behavior must match the terms. If it doesn't operate like real debt, the IRS doesn't have to treat it like real debt. And step 4, timing matters more than explanations, okay? Documentation created after the fact carries far less weight than documentation created at the time of the transaction. Audits are won or lost on timing, okay? If your evidence didn't exist when the money was moved, the IRS may treat it as income regardless of what everyone understood. And step 5, understand the real risk, okay? Most people don't lose audits because the money was taxable. They lose because they can't prove it wasn't. When the documentation is missing, unclear, or retroactive, the IRS can fill in the gaps, and it does so in its favor. The fix is simple but non-negotiable. Decide what the money was, document it contemporaneously, and treat it consistently. That's how you stop the IRS from recharacterizing deposits, and that's how you stop overpaying. And for actual tax law from a tax attorney, subscribe.